leave any old fruits and vegetables. You're not allowed to dice the small pieces. And how are you allowed to do it on Shabbos? Can you hear that? It's a shinui gadol. It's a big shinui. It's extremely unusual. An extremely unusual way, then you could grind, slice, dice into tiny pieces. If you do it in a highly unusual way, which is what? The back of the spoon, the back of the knife. 28. Is it permitted to crush challah, cookies, cakes, cereal? You're allowed to crush them.
Yes. Yes, there's no grinding after grinding.
Because it's already ground. 29. How is it permitted to mix baby cereal with liquid?
Back of the spoon and the unusual cross.
You mean formula?
Formula, yes, formula. It's a better term. Use formula. Formula, yeah.
Water first, the formula.
You have to reverse the order how you put it in. You have to do it with the back of a spoon, not in a regular way. And also there's something else. It has to be, there's another condition. There's another condition in the consistency. Consistency has to be not liquidy. Liquidy is not an issue. Has to be looser, has to be loose. It can't be thick. Has to be loose. Everyone get that?
This also.
This thick, huh?
This also apply if you're making protein.
Mix. If it's loose, if it's watery, then there's no issue.
It's also.
Oh, the only issue is when there's consistency. So if it's not thick, like when you make matzo balls, it's thick. If it's loose, like pancake batter, pancake batter could be even watery, right? Pancake batter is watery. Not really.
Really thick.
It's thick. Okay, so pancake batter is a good example. It has a thickness, but the pancake batter you could pour. Now you go like this and it'll pour right out. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a loose batter. So it cannot be thick where it's so thick that you can't pour it out. Get it? Yeah.
Is this like the baby formula? Is it the same if you're making oatmeal for yourself? Like you have to put the water in first and make it looser and do it back of the spoon.
Well, oatmeal, it could become a thick texture. It becomes a thick texture, it doesn't help. So all these things only help when it's a loose batter. When it's not thick. If it's a thick texture, like oatmeal, which is usually thick. Anything that's thick, when you make matzo balls, it's thick. Thick means that they go like this, it's not going to pour out. It's just going to stay inside. Then you're not allowed. Even if you do it in a different way, it doesn't help. It only helps if it's a loose batter.
But you can like, oatmeal, you can do like a bunch of water, you can make it loose.
You could make it loose with oatmeal.
So you would have to make it loose yourself?
It has to be loose enough that you could pour it out.
Okay. Thank you.
It could be an issue of cooking oatmeal if you're using hot water. That could be an issue. That's a separate discussion. Bishul, cooking. Was it cooked already before? Well, the next topic is actually Bishul, cooking.
Okay.
I'm going to start it soon, yeah.
If you had pre-cooked oatmeal, like overnight oats, and you wanted to like warm it back up without cooking it further, could you just add hot water to make it loose and liquidy, or would that also be an issue?
So it's thick.
Yeah.
And it's cold, and you want to warm it up and make it looser.
That permissible?
To make something loose, so when you make something looser, then again, if you have the shini, don't do it in the regular way, as we discussed here, then it's fine. $30. In what way is it permitted to prepare egg salad or potato salad?
If you need large chunks.
There's large pieces in there. So the pieces, the egg pieces, the potato pieces are visible. So it's not the definition of lush. The malach of lush meaning is when it becomes one, it fuses into one entity. But when it's distinct, you could see the pieces inside, then it's not really becoming one. Then it's not lush. Lush is when it's all fused into one thing. Okay, so now we're ready to start. Next topic of Bishul, cooking on Shabbos. Cooking on Shabbos. So, like any other malacha, the minhag of Shabbos comes from the Mishkan, for the building of the Mishkan. So, when did they do cooking in the building of the Mishkan? Anyone else? The herbs that they would grow for the dye. They went to malach of dash, threshing, extracting the herb, the kernel that was the herb that they would boil and make a dye out of it, right? So we spoke about crushing it, grinding, crushing. They would crush it, and then knead it, make it into a paste, and then they would boil it. That's how they made the dye. They would grind it. That's how we have malach of grinding. Then they would make it into a paste. They would knead it, kneading, because they would knead it with water. They would put it together, and then after they ground it, they would mix it together, make it into like a dough, make it into sort of like a paste, and then they would boil it in water. Then that water would turn into a dye, D-Y-E. That's how we have the law of boiling, cooking. From this, we have the malachas of all types of cooking, baking, because anything that was similar to what was done in the Mishkan is prohibited. We mentioned many times, even if it's not exactly what was done in the Mishkan, but if it's the same idea, now the same idea, it sounds very vague, so that's the same. I mean, it has to have the same criteria. The criteria for cooking in the Mishkan was that they used heat of fire, and they used that heat to change the texture of the item. Boiling, what does boiling do? They would boil it. They would boil this in water, and by boiling, it changes the texture. That's what boiling does. So anytime you use heat that comes from fire to change the texture, whether it's food or whether it's wax, doesn't matter. But someone takes a candle, piece of wax, and he puts it over the fire, and the fire melts the wax. So you're using fire to change the texture. It's the same idea. That's the malacha of Bishul, using fire, using the heat of fire to change the texture. Usually it's in cooking, changing the texture of the food, making it edible. But it also applies to, if, let's say another example, if someone makes pottery, you have earthenware, you formed a vessel, and then you put it into, well, that's a malacha for itself. I'm not discussing that. Forming something. Let's say you take something, you have it all prepared, and you put it into the kiln, into fire, and then that's how you make pottery. So the heat changes the texture. It becomes now pottery. This is the malacha of Bishul, because you're using the heat of fire to change the texture. That's Bishul. So even though the Mishkan, it was boiling, it was with hot water, but it doesn't matter. Anything similar, the same idea, using the heat of fire to change the texture. So it's cooking, frying, baking. And even if it's not on fire anymore, so you have a pot that you boiled up hot water in it. Now you take it off the fire, so it's not on the fire anymore. Now, what's cooking the food? The fire? No, the hot water. But the hot water became hot from the fire. It's the same exact thing. But now we have like this. You have a pot of hot water, boiling water, take it off the fire, and you're going to put inside, let's say, vegetables that were not cooked yet. And you're going to put it inside. Is the vegetable going to cook? It's not on the fire. It's not going to cook because it's not on the fire. Technically, you don't call this cooking, because you can't cook raw vegetables when the pot, even though the pot is very hot, but if it's not on the fire, it needs to boil, it needs to bubble for a while. It's off the fire, it's very hot now, it's cooling off, it's not going to cook. Technically, you don't call it cooking. halachically, that's called cooking. Because even though it's so minute what's happening, like how much is going to change from the texture, but something is happening. The hot water is having an effect on the vegetable, and that's called cooking. So here we come to what's called a kli rishon. A kli rishon mivashim. So that's the rule. A kli rishon means the first keli, the keli that was on the fire, has the ability to cook. As long as it's hot, as long as it's yad say like this, yad soy lettuce. Yad say lettuce, these are terms you should learn. Yad say lettuce, the hand recoils. That it's so hot, as you put your finger inside, you pull out your finger. It's extremely uncomfortable to keep your finger there. It's too hot. That's what it means, yad say lettuce. As long as it's that temperature, it has the ability to cook, and you can't put anything, say take a pot of soup off the fire, you can't put anything that wasn't cooked yet. Putting in salt, putting in raw vegetables, anything that wasn't cooked, you can't put inside because it has the ability to cook, even though it's not so hot, it's not boiling hot. I'm not going to burn myself. But it's yatsi lettuce. Yatsi lettuce does not mean that it's burning hot, that you can burn yourself. Yatsi lettuce means that it's so hot that it's extremely uncomfortable to keep your hand in. And your hand recoils, you're going to pull out your hand. If you stick your finger inside, you're just going to pull it out because it's too hot. What exactly is that temperature? There are different opinions, ranging from 108 to 160 Fahrenheit. So starting from 108, it's already questionable if it's yatsi lettuce. Then we have what's called irui mikli. Irui means pouring. Irui mikli rishon. Pouring, irui, pouring, mikli rishon from the kli rishon. I take the pot of soup, hot pot of soup, and I pour it on top of the salt. I pour it on top of raw vegetables. Does that have the ability to cook? And the answer is yes. If it's yatsi lettuce, it has the ability to cook, and you cannot pour onto salt, or let's say if it's hot water, onto coffee. You cannot, because it also has the ability to cook. It's not as potent, it's not as powerful, obviously, because you're not putting it inside. So it doesn't have the ability to cook as much, but it does have the ability to cook, and you can't do that on Shabbos. Then we come to what's called a kli sheni. Kli sheni is a second vessel, which you may be familiar with. A kli sheni, if you take the pot of soup and you pour it into another bowl, now the bowl is a kli sheni. If you pour yourself a cup of coffee, take hot water from the urn, fill up a cup of water, this cup is a kli sheni. Halachically, a kli sheni ain't mivashel. It doesn't have the ability to cook. Technically, it does not have the ability to cook, but that's not what the story ends. Okay, that's not. We didn't get to practical halacha. Don't walk away. Oh, we're starting now with the foundation. Kli sheni ain't mivashel. A kli sheni does not have the ability to cook halachically, which means that theoretically, you should be allowed to put anything in a kli sheni because it doesn't have the ability to cook. Reason is because once it's transferred to another pot, that weakens, first of all, reduces the heat, but also primarily it weakens the power of the water, the fact that it was transferred. Also, the walls aren't hot. In a kli rishon, a pot of soup, it's on the fire, so the walls of the keli, the walls of the pot is very hot because it's on the fire. When you transfer it to another vessel, that vessel was not on the fire. So the vessel, the kli sheni, the walls of the kli sheni isn't so hot. Isn't hot at all. I mean, it wasn't on the fire. That's the reason why kli sheni does not have the ability to cook. We're going to get back to that. Then we have Irei Mikli Sheni. Pouring from a Kli Sheni. Now, Kli Sheni does not have the ability to cook. If you pour from Kli Sheni, also it doesn't, right? But if you pour from a Kli Sheni, oh, there's something else that comes before that. Something comes before that. Let's talk about now. There's something called Yad Nichris. Kli Sheni. Now I'm putting it Yad Nichris. Yad Nichris means the hand will get burnt. Nichris means burnt. There's a pasuk in the Torah in Parashas Mishpatim, Kviya Tachas Kviya. A burn for a burn. Kviya means a burn. So your hand will get burnt. So till now we discussed Yad Siledis. Now we're getting to higher temperatures. It's Yad Nichris. Your hand will get burnt. Now doesn't mean necessarily first degree burn, but it's you could burn yourself. It's very hot. One second. The high temperature is 30 degrees, right? I mean, that's what I meant to say. It's not necessarily a third degree burn, right? 30 degrees worse than I'm confused. Yeah. Saying so. Just when you say the term gets your hand will get burnt, we don't mean burnt like serious, but it's not just that when you put it in your hand it's too uncomfortable and you pull it out, but like when you have hot water, just boiled hot water on the fire. Even if it's not right away, it's mamish, you could really hurt yourself. But it's very, very hot water. I mean, a lot of times when people make coffee, so certain urns they won't use for coffee because it's not hot enough, right? Ring a bell, like when you make coffee, like it's not hot enough. It's not really hot. It's hot, but it's not. You won't have a really hot water. Like, so that's usually when we say Yad Nichris, the hand will get burnt. That's what I mean. It's like really, really hot. Now, when it's Yad Nichris over here, even though it's a Kli Sheni, it's Mavashi. It has the ability to cook. It has the ability to cook. And now you cannot put anything, whatever you cannot put in a Kli Nishen, you cannot put in a Kli Sheni, according to Halacha, if it's Yad Nichris, that your hand could get burnt. Now I'm going to go to Irui Mikli Sheni. Irui Mikli Sheni. Pouring from a Kli Sheni. So let's talk a regular Irui Mikli Sheni. And then we're going to talk about Irui Mikli Sheni Yad Nichris. Irui Mikli Sheni. Pouring from a Kli Sheni Yad Nichris. Your hand can get burnt. So it would be the same idea. A Kli Sheni Yad Nichris, pouring from a Kli Sheni Yad Nichris, the same idea. Irui Mikli Sheni, of course, is Ein Mevashel, does not have the ability to cook. There is a distinction between pouring, when we talk about pouring from a Kli Sheni, there's going to be a difference between pouring onto liquid or pouring onto solids. Okay, so again, pouring from a Kli Sheni Yad Nichris, that your hand could get burnt. We said a Kli Sheni Yad Nichris is the same like a Kli Rishon because you could get burnt. Yad Nichris. Pouring from a Kli Sheni Yad Nichris is the same idea. However, if you're pouring from a Kli Sheni onto liquid, that's okay. I'm going to get into more details about it. So when we say pouring from cliche yad mikvah is not allowed, that's pouring onto solid food. Pouring onto liquid, it's different. Now, wish I had another board. Could we take this off? I should take a picture. I left my phone downstairs. One second. Want to take a picture of it?
I just did, I'm sending
You
you.
took a picture?
Yeah.
Okay. You want to send it?
Amy asked for it, does anyone else need it?
Can you send it to you, this code, or just you can send it to me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna take this off. When you're done, you'll put it back on. Now, here's a rule, ein bishul achar bishul. Essentially, today we're focusing on just learning the basics. So you have the terminology, the basic halachas, and then we can build further, so it won't be too overwhelming. Tomorrow, we'll go into more details, everything, you'll get all the details together. There's a rule, ein bishul achar bishul. There's no cooking after cooking. What does it mean there's no cooking after cooking? Once something is cooked, you can't cook it again. Let's say on Shabbos, you have a hot pot of soup, and you want to put in spaghetti into the soup. You take out cold spaghetti from the refrigerator and hot piping soup, and you want to put all the spaghetti into the pot of soup. You can't put it while it's on the fire. You want to put it, you're going to take the pot off the fire and put the cold spaghetti into the soup. And now the spaghetti is going to become very hot. Are you allowed to do it? Yes, because ein bishul achar bishul. There's no cooking after cooking. Once something is cooked already, you can't cook it again. You don't transgress. However, this is only by something that's dry. But when it comes to something that's lach, this is by a yavish, something that's dry. But something that's a lach, something that's wet, that's moist, yesh. Bishul. There is cooking after cooking. There is cooking after cooking by something that's moist, by wet. In other words, let's say you have a cup of water that was already cooked. You poured yourself a cup of hot water, and the water cooled off. Now it's room temperature. By the way, when we say cold, room temperature is the same thing like cold in this discussion. So your cup of hot water now is room temperature. Now you want to add more hot water from the urn on top of this room temperature water. Now you're going to be recooking it, but it's already cooked. It was cooked already. But if it became cold again, there is cooking, because by liquid we do say there is cooking. But actually, it's actually a machlokes. It is a machlokes, but Alter Rebbe says we should be strict when it comes to liquid, that we will not pour from the hot water directly onto cold liquid, because you are recooking the liquid. However, Alter Rebbe says, being it is a machlokes, Alter Rebbe says you could be lenient if it's still warm. In other words, we're going in the middle. We're saying if it's still warm, this warmth to it. Now there is hot yatziledis. Under that goes warm. What people call warm. We have them drinking a warm tea. It's not what it's warm. And then this room temperature, which in this halacha, in the discussion of halacha, it's cold. So
Why is that a discussion in halacha that it's cold?
in other words, when we discuss in halacha and we say, oh, the liquid is cold, are you allowed to recook it? What do we mean by cold? We mean that it's not hot anymore. It lost all its heat. When it becomes room temperature, it lost its heat. So in terms of discussion of halacha, we say it's cold, hot. Cold doesn't mean cold water. I want a cup of cold water. Cold means that it's room temperature, has no warmth anymore. Actually, according to the opinion that says that it is considered cooking liquid after it cools off. So even according to that opinion that you're not allowed to recook it when it loses the heat, even if it's still warm, you're also not allowed to recook it. Because once it falls below Yatsi Ledus, now you're already recooking it. But being that there's a machlek, because some say you're allowed, so the Alter Rebbe goes in the middle, and the Alter Rebbe says, if it still has warmth, you could be lenient, and you're allowed to recook it. So it's like right in the middle between both opinions.
So with this, my question from earlier about oatmeal, it would seem like you couldn't reheat it because it's wet. Like my question earlier with adding hot water to oatmeal to make it warmer and make it like a thin liquid, it sounds like you couldn't.
I didn't understand that it was wet,
Well,
because you're saying oatmeal is wet
yeah,
after it congeals, after
I mean, how do you define wet?
wet means that when you put your finger on it, it's wet enough to make something else wet. So when you make oatmeal, it stands for a few minutes and it cooks,
Congeals, yeah.
congeals, and then when you touch it, it's pretty much dry. We go according to the outside. Definition of dry means that when you touch it on the surface, it's dry. What happens inside, we don't care, because it becomes nullified. It becomes the Metzius becomes according to what the outside is. This is what it is. So if the outside is dry, it's considered dry. So drink tea, a cup of coffee, and after a while, it's not hot, but it's still warm. That means I'm allowed to take my cup of coffee and go to the earth and add more hot water directly into it, because it was already cooked, and because it's still warm, I'm allowed to add hot water. Now, you have to make sure that it's warm. It could be a little confusing, the term. How do you define warm? It's hard to, put it into words. Warm means what you call warm. I don't mean what you call as opposed to your own definition. I didn't mean your own. What I meant is, like, if you're drinking something there?
Coffee, yeah,
Coffee, right. So what is it now?
it's cold.
It's called room temperature, right?
Yeah.
But when you started drinking it, it was very hot. 10, 15 minutes into the drink, it was warm. After 15 minutes, it's still warm, right? And let's say half an hour later, after half an hour, it's already room temperature, right? In other words, what people call warm, that's warm. As opposed to room temperature. It has to have some warmth to it. Okay? Okay, so let's go back to Kli Sheni. So we're going to go back. Okay, I'm going to take this off the board. We're going to go back and talk a little bit about Kli Sheni now. We spoke before about Kli Sheni. This is what Kli Rishon is pretty simple, but Kli Sheni is what there's a lot of discussion. Kli Sheni Einu Mevash. So get on the board. Get Kli Sheni Einu Mevash was not the ability to cook. Halacha Kli, you should be allowed to put anything in a Kli Sheni. Practically, there's a problem. Our sages tell us that there are certain foods that will cook in a Kli Sheni, and we don't know what they are. We don't know what they are. So therefore, don't put anything in a Kli Sheni. Only what we tell you. So there are certain things our sages say, those things you could put in, but anything else, don't put in. Because we're not sure, because it might cook. There's certain foods that are very sensitive. They cook very quickly. So don't put anything in Kli Sheni besides liquids. Now, it never says you could put all liquids in a Kli Sheni. But the catch is Yad Seiledus. The catch is Yad Seiledus, not Yad Nichvis. Remember, there's two temperatures, Yad Seiledus and Yad Nichvis. Now, Yad Nichvis means you can get burnt, Yatzles, your hand recoils. Yatzles is not as hot as Yad Nichris. So if it's Yatzles only, but not Yad Nichris, not burning hot, then we could be lenient and you could put all liquids into a Kli. Also, they said you could put in spices. You could put in spices. And Irin Miklisheni, or from a Klisheni, Yatziledis, you don't have to keep all these stringencies. So whatever stringencies there is about restrict not to put a Klisheni, that's only inside the Klisheni. But pouring from a Klisheni onto something else, that's not a problem, as long as it's Yatziledis, not Yad Nichus, not burning hot. What if you have Eden Miklisheni Yad Nichris? Where you could burn yourself, then again, we have to be strict. Just like you don't put it inside the Klisheni, you don't pour from the Klisheni onto other foods. The exception is, we mentioned before, if it's liquid. Very interesting exception. That if you are pouring from the Klisheni, have a Klisheni, and are pouring it onto other liquids, that's okay. So if, let's say I want to make coffee, from what I understand from the other classes, I was told that it's not the best way to make coffee, but it's a way that hopefully it's allowed, which is you have a cup filled with hot water from the urn, and then you pour it into some milk. So you're pouring from the Klisheni into milk. Now, the milk wasn't, let's say the milk, even the milk was cooked already, it's pasteurized, but it's cold. But because you're pouring from the Klisheni onto the milk, that's okay. And then the water is not so hot, so now you can add the coffee. But from what I understand, it's not the most practical way to make coffee, but logically it's allowed.
If you don't use milk in your coffee, like,
So how do you make coffee?
yeah,
So what do people do? So we have what's the Kli Shlishi.
yeah.
Okay. So Kli Shlishi, I wasn't actually planning to go into all this, but it's all intertwined, so ready to discuss it. A Kli Shlishi. Why do people use a Klisheni when they make coffee? What's a Klisheni? Maybe the Klisheni. The Klisheni is you go to the hot water, you pour yourself a cup of water, hot water. Now that's a Klisheni. Now you pour it into another cup. Now that's a Kli Shlishi. Now in that Kli Shlishi, that's when they put the coffee, the milk, everything in, because that's okay. According to most opinions, that's okay, because it's already a Kli Shlishi. Not everyone. How do you make coffee? You pour yourself a cup of hot water into your cup. Now that cup, when you put the hot water into, what is that? That is a Kli. Then you pour that into another cup, that's a Kli Shlishi. In the Kli Shlishi, you can put everything in, coffee, whatever you want. According to most opinions, it's accepted, they can put everything inside. Even if it's Yad Nichris. According to most opinions.
So once you've used three, so basically once you've used the three vessels, even if it's still your
According to most opinions, my father's actually strict. He holds that you shouldn't because it's Yad Nichris. But many opinions, most opinions that I saw, they are lenient. They say Yad Kli Shlishi, it's 100% okay. Even if you could burn yourself, it doesn't have the ability to cook anymore, and you're allowed to do it. So most opinions are lenient. You want to be strict, you want it to be strict, but most opinions are lenient once it's already a Kli Shlishi. what is the reason? Actually, no, don't see- do you have any questions? Any questions of this so far?
Wait, you were saying, we just said about the free shishi, it's okay to be strict, most opinions say it's okay?
Most of you say,
Okay,
once a
so what?
klishlishi, you could put, that's what people do all the time.
Okay,
They
so-
take a cup, pour into another cup, klishlishi, and because klisheni already is officially no stringency that was strict not to put a klisheni. Once a klishlishi, they feel that it's already 100% okay. That's the way most opinions hold. Yeah,
So making your Shabbos coffee, hot water urn, which is a kli rishon, or
the urn is a
Yeah.
klisheni. You take coffee,
and
you
then
take hot water, that's a klisheni, the second cup.
and then you pour into a third kli
That's a shlishi,
and then you put your coffee in, and you're good.
put everything inside, yeah.
Amazing.
According to most opinions, okay. According to my father, he says you should not allow. Most opinions say you could,
Okay,
you're allowed, it's a klishlishi.
thank you.
So. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so let's jump tomorrow, we'll continue with this.
Thank you.
Can I borrow a piece of paper?
Do you want me to send Mrs. Cohen a picture of this board?
Yeah. Last year when I taught it, I tried to keep it really good. It's all took a picture, and I think I said, I got it somehow, but I can't find it now. Maybe I'll figure out.
I sent her both.
Huh?
I sent both to her.
Okay, good. Well, the second one, I know, the first one. Everyone.